Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer. Going to talk about Venus going direct just a couple of days ago. So the first thing that I want to bring into focus is that Venus conjuncts the Sun every 9 months, okay? So the Sun and Venus come together, and I like to now use this term that I've heard from Ariel Gutman. The Sun and Venus kiss each other, as it were. It's a very, very important moment or phenomena in the heavens when the Sun and Venus come together. There's an energy portal. There's a light. There's just a very powerful energy that opens up wherever that conjunction occurs in your chart, pretty much every 9 months. So that's one point. The other point is every 1.6 years, Venus goes retrograde. So the last retrograde cycle we had was in Scorpio. It was a Venus Star Point in Scorpio, which occurred 2018, October. So here we are 1.6 years later, and we have the Venus Gemini Star Point. Venus went retrograde on the 12th of May in the sign of Gemini at 21 degrees. So that 21 degree number is very, very important. Now, Venus goes retrograde for about 40 days. So that too is a very significant number and time and cycle. It's Venus more or less turning within. That's what a retrograde means. It means turning within, it appears to be going backwards from our perspective here on Earth, but the symbolic meaning to that is the inward turn that we take inside our own selves relative to all things Venus. Now, Venus going retrograde during this time and becoming a Venus star point in the sign of Gemini is due to her forming a conjunction to the Sun, which is, because she's a morning star, she's described as a bit of a warrior goddess, to use Ariel Gutman's terminology. So we have a morning star Venus and we have an evening star Venus. The morning star is the one that we have been dealing with relative to this time. And in the sign of Gemini, that holds a whole other level of interpretation as well, which I want to bring in some esoteric meaning as well. But this cycle is very, very significant for so many different reasons. First of all, it's almost, you could say, it's the beginning and the end, as it were, because when something ends or when something begins, it's the same thing. You can't really separate those two things. The birth and the closure of something is the same thing. One thing is born, another thing completes, right? So it's the same thing. So Venus going retrograde in the sign of Gemini, becoming the Venus star point, being the morning star, in other words, being the warrior goddess type of energy, as opposed to the evening star, where she's a nocturnal Venus star point, you could say. She's the furthest from the Earth, okay, and when she is a morning star, she's the closest to the Earth, which is called an inferior or interior conjunction. And just a couple of words, and I'm actually just quoting Ariel Gutman, and she says that when Venus is the night star, because she's connected to the night sky, she brings forth the divine wisdom of the night sky, you could say, the intelligence, the deep wisdom of the night sky, literally. And so she connects to that part of our consciousness in terms of what she can, or how we can download her frequency, her energy, tuning into the night sky, right? Obtaining the mystery and the secrets of the night sky. When she's a morning star, which is what she has been now, in the current times. She's connected more to, she's the closest to the earth. An inferior or interior conjunction means that she's the closest to the earth. So her energy and frequency is felt very intensely on the earth plane, which is quite evident, especially in the sign of Gemini, relative to the current collective global events that have been going on for some time now. The Black Lives Matter issue, for example, that's all relative to Venus in Gemini, Venus going retrograde in Gemini. The world of communication, education, travel, all these things that have been changed and impacted quite significantly, probably more significantly at this point in time during our lifetime at least. So when she's closest to the earth, she takes on that warrior goddess type of energy, and she's also connected to and concerned with the earthly matters. So the mothering, nurturing qualities that come through her relative to what is actually happening on the earth, which is seen through, reflected through, and projected through the entire consciousness of the collective or unconscious collective. So she is a morning star, and that's why we have experienced her and seen her on a collective level, sparking and energizing these very controversial matters as well, relative to, I say controversial because there are so many different opinions and views, which is Gemini. Gemini is the left brain, it's the linear mind, it's one's personal point of view and opinion. And we've got a very strong Neptune and Pisces influence coming into all of this, of course, because Neptune has been squaring this Venus retrograde as well. So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, you could say, relative to information and what is actually truth and what is actually simply not the truth. So those are some of the collective issues relative to this Venus retrograde cycle, which is a Venus Star Point in Gemini. And as I said, the last time this occurred was 8 years ago in 2012. So this is the birthing of a brand new cycle relative to the Venus Star Point in the sign of Gemini. So in terms of an individual level, it can be very useful to go back and have a think about what was going on in your life in 2012, because there was a retrograde cycle of Venus in the sign of Gemini 8 years ago again, right? So revisit that timeline in your own life relative to where that is in your birth chart. Obviously, that's going to be located wherever you have Gemini in your birth chart. Have a think about what was going on then. Relative to the current cycle, this particular Venus retrograde has also been influenced quite strongly by the solar eclipse that we've just had on the 21st of June, which was at 0 degrees of Cancer. Now, I've sort of been offline for the last 2 weeks, more or less, because this retrograde cycle, I'm not going to go into the personal details, but I do want to make a couple of points that I feel would be very useful for my viewers, because this could be a situation that has occurred to you or will occur. So the last 2 weeks I've been inactive, as it were, because I've had to address and take care of a very personal matter in my own life that was quite urgent, quite critical, incredibly intense and incredibly distressing. And not over it yet. It's got nothing to do with my own personal health, as it were, but it has got something to do with the personal health of one of my family members. And it's been, as I said, a very distressing situation in my life. And the reason I'm even mentioning it is because it does actually relate to the Venus retrograde cycle and where that was in my chart, and also the solar eclipse. So the Venus retrograde cycle in Gemini and the solar eclipse in Cancer have both hit off 2 houses in my chart, both of which connect to the matters that came to light relative to a family member of mine. So the interesting thing is this: all this kicked off while Venus was retrograde in Gemini, and just as Venus was about to go stationary direct, which was on the 25th of June, I actually I was watching this cycle very, very carefully, because I knew what it was describing in my life relative to a family member. And I also knew that as soon as Venus went direct, that there was going to be basically progress and a shift. Okay, and that's exactly what happened. It was the day that Venus went direct, stationary direct. Now, when Venus, or any planet for that matter, is stationary direct, it's the planet has virtually stopped, right? It's stopped in its tracks because it's getting ready to turn the other way. And that stationary point is like a full voltage point of energy. Things can happen, but at the same time, from our perspective relative to external action, it all just comes to a stop, and there's this intensified energy, and the moment she moves, which is the subsequent day, that's when something opens up and shifts. And that's exactly what happened. So the moment she went direct, we had a breakthrough and we had some progress in a positive way. And that was an enormous relief for me, because as I said, this was a very personal situation that was very, very distressing for me and for the family member involved as well. One thing I want to bring to your attention as well is the fifth house in the birth chart. This really just all kind of clicked together relative to these recent events in my own life. I was reading a book not so long ago on eclipses by just forgotten the author's name. I'll have to find the book and maybe just make a note in the description below at a later stage. But I was reading a story about a woman whose fifth house was being hit off by a really powerful solar eclipse. This was many, many years ago. And the astrologer that was assessing the solar eclipse in the fifth house was struggling to relate the meaning of the eclipse relative to the fifth house, because the fifth house means many different things, but one thing it relates to is children, one's own children, or giving birth to children. Now, this particular woman had no children, but she had a pet that was like her child. So the solar eclipse that hit off that chart directly impacted her pet, okay, because that fifth house becomes her pet because it's like her child. And I know for all the animal lovers out there, a lot of you will relate to this, because even for me, my pet, I don't consider it a pet. She's like my child, right? So just keep that in mind, because you won't read that anywhere necessarily. You won't read the fifth house can equate to your pet, but I'm telling you that it does, okay, from first-hand experience as well. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Now, this Venus in Gemini, we will have Venus in Gemini ultimately for 3 months, which is quite a long time. Because she went into Gemini, I think it was April sometime, right? So she doesn't leave the sign of Gemini until around about I think it's the first week of August. Yeah, it's about the 8th of August when she actually finally completes her journey in the sign of Gemini and goes into Cancer. Now, she went direct just a couple of days ago, and she was retrograde for 40 days. And as I said before, the number 40 is very significant in spiritual and religious scriptures and texts and traditions and practices. Uh, there's many correlations to that, but just very simply put, in in Orthodox Christian religion, which is what I was raised into, when somebody is born, we have a celebration 40 days later after their birth. And equally, when somebody transcends and leaves their body, there is also a very specific ritual and practice that takes place 40 days after the soul has left the body. So there's something very mystical and spiritual and deeply complex to the spiritual life and to the soul relative to 40 days here on earth. And this is the journey that Venus takes when she goes retrograde. It's usually about 40 days where she is retrograde. So she's taking us through some very, very deep processes that take us deep into our soul life, as it were. But the re-evaluation, which is the most appropriate word to use for Venus going retrograde, because Venus, as we know, is the ruler of Libra and the ruler of Taurus. And one point I want to make about that, and now I'll be quoting Mark Jones, who's an astrologer and psychotherapist based in the UK, who's done a lot of work. He works mainly with evolutionary astrology. And I've done a lot of his webinars of late, and he's just fantastic. One thing he says that I really, really like, which encapsulates um, the dual rulership that Venus has over Taurus and Libra. The Taurus component of Venus is our own personal self, as in our own personal self-worth, uh, our own personal values, and the way that that um, manifests or is given birth or is expressed or is experienced comes back to our early upbringing, our primary caregivers, whoever they were, whether we had biological parents or not, whoever our primary caregivers were, whatever was fed back to us or validated back to us relative to our own sense of worth is the experience of Taurus, right? So when we look to the other side of Venus that rules Libra, it is our own sense of worth, self-worth, that is expressed through the Libran side. It's the challenge to step out of ourself and meet the other in Libra. So the Taurus part is our part of ourself, right? And the Libran part is the part that challenges us to step outside of ourself and meet another person in a relationship. That's why Taurus and Libra, the distance between them is 150 degrees, which is equivalent to the what's called the inconjunct or the quincunx aspect. And the inconjunct aspect has very much to do with a readjustment within our own selves. It's not an easy transition to go from one to the other. That's why it's an inconjunct. There's a lot of internal resolution or adjusting that needs to go on. And relative to Taurus and Venus, it's the having enough inner sense of worth and understanding and values of our own self to feel confident enough to meet another person in where they stand themselves. So these are all elements of what Venus connects to anyway, because she's the ruler of those two signs. So those matters are also very significant when Venus goes retrograde, because she takes us through those various layers of what she correlates to relative to our own self and, of course, our relationships in our lives. So when Venus goes retrograde, one very typical manifestation is relationships can come to an end. That's a very typical response to Venus going retrograde. But whether you're in a relationship or not, when Venus goes retrograde, there's a very deep process of assessment and re-evaluation that goes on relative to what you actually really love in your life. Remember, Venus is a principle of attraction and a magnetic principle. So Venus is always going to speak to how we attract what we what we enjoy, what we love, what we appreciate, what we need in our life. So Venus going retrograde takes us through this reevaluation, reassessment of the things that we love and enjoy in our life. Now, in the sign of Gemini, it's obviously going to connect to Gemini type of things, but again, that's also going to be reflected through whatever house she's in. So the house that Venus is transiting in her retrograde cycle in the sign of Gemini, the house describes the area of life that gets that is lit up. Okay, because pardon me, the Venus retrograde cycle occurs because of the Sun Venus conjunction. So the Sun Venus conjunction, and I like what Ariel says. She says it's the heartbeat of the earth. When the Sun and Venus come together, there's this opening of the heart. It's very much connected to the heart chakra, actually. And the Venus Star Point, according to Ariel Gutman, and I am in agreement with this 100%. I love her work. I've been immersing myself in her work of late. So I will be talking a lot more about the Venus Star Point as time progresses. I've been studying very deeply her material. I've done some of her webinars, and anyway, so I've been kind of immersing myself in that, which is a very Venus thing to do and a Venus retrograde thing to do. So this Venus retrograde cycle for me has been one of the most important times in my life. Actually, it's quite remarkable what it's brought up for me. Anyway, I sort of digressed there. So let me just get back to what I was saying. So yeah, that's right. That the house that Venus takes you through when she's going retrograde in Gemini, that's the area of life that's going to light up, right? I've actually seen this in so many ways. I've seen it through in my own personal life. I've seen it through clients I've been working with, and just people I know in my personal life as well. One of my best friends, Venus retrograde in the 4th house. His story is quite literal. It's really beautiful, actually. When Venus went retrograde, he was informed that he had to move from where he was living, and it happened very suddenly. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is because Venus went retrograde in his 4th house and was conjunct Uranus. All right, so when something hits off Uranus, things happen suddenly, unexpectedly. He was not expecting to be notified that he had to move. It just came out of the blue, very suddenly. Well, Venus went retrograde in his 4th house, right? So, and very, very quickly and very suddenly, he found a place just within 2 weeks. It all happened so quickly. But there was the timeline within that was very, very interesting, because it started when Venus went retrograde. He found the place while Venus was still retrograde, and when Venus went direct, there was just a sequence of things that were going on relative to Venus going retrograde, Venus stationary, and Venus direct. And he moved into a street that is called Rose Avenue. Okay, now Venus grows flowers. The number of the unit and the street number adds up to what was it? It adds up to number 5. I think it was number 5, which is the pentagram, the Venus, Venus star. There was all these synchronicities that just came together. It was just an incredible story. I had a client who had booked in for a session, but something came up and that person needed to withdraw from the reading at the moment because they needed to use the finances towards something else that came up unexpectedly as well. So this is another Venus retrograde thing that can occur, because what we are doing is we are reassessing basically our values, what we value, what we feel very strongly in our hearts, because Venus, especially the Venus star point, according to R.L. Gutman, your Venus star point before birth, right, your natal Venus star point before birth, which could be in Gemini, uh, is basically the heart chakra. It's the head-heart connection. And the conjunction between the Sun and Venus, that's what it embodies. That's what it opens up, that heart energy. So Venus has got to do very much with basically what we love and what we enjoy. We might be going through a process because we're reevaluating while she's retrograde. We're reevaluating our relationships, our money, how we're handling all of that, what we're investing ourselves into. It's an investment, when we're investing our money into something, especially from a Venus level, it's something that we really enjoy or love, that really radiates through our heart center. When we invest ourselves in a relationship, it's the same thing. We're usually investing from our heart center as well. So all these matters have been under review the past 40 days. Now, Venus went direct a couple of days ago, and as I said, for me personally, there was an amazing breakthrough that took place, which was so relieving for me. But I think for all of you individually, it's really about assessing where Venus was retrograde in your birth chart, and also understanding that what you are sort of putting into intention now, what you're putting into focus now relative to your own personal values and what you want to invest in. There's two parts to this. One part is we will see aspects of that in 1.6 years when we have another Venus star point, which will be in Capricorn or Aries. I've just forgotten. Let me just double check. Yeah, Capricorn. In 2022, early of 2022, at 26 degrees of Capricorn. That's the next Venus star point. So that's in 1.6 years. That's when Venus will go retrograde again. So a lot of the things that you are considering at the moment relative to the things you value, the things you invest yourself in, your relationships, your money, things that you enjoy, the things that you love. We're talking about Venus, love, right? I mean, we love a lot of things, a lot of material things as well. It can be all of it's what you value. What you value has got nothing to do with the substance of the thing, of the material thing. It's the reason it holds value is because you hold that value in your own heart towards it or for it, right? So you're kind of setting the tone for the next 1.6 years and what's going to come into fruition and manifestation at that point. And from a larger perspective, this has got to do with the next 8-year cycle of the Venus star point in Gemini, because the next one will occur in 8 years' time, right? So there's a multi-layer of things going on relative to any Venus star point at any time. It's not just the one thing. There's a couple of layers going on. And to extend that even further, there's a much larger cycle which has got to do with the Venus star point spending approximately 100 years in one sign. So that's obviously more significant to global, worldly trends and events and changes and shifts that go on from a global and collective level. So there's quite a few layers. But just to personalize it and bring it back to yourself and what it is that you are truly trying to align with from the point of view of heart center Venus, and what you are ready to eliminate, disregard, clear out, complete, and start afresh. This is the time to be doing it. Venus going direct a couple of days ago has, I mean, it's literally a couple of days, so the wheels have only just sort of, it's like when she stops, as I said before, it just becomes this intensified energy where there's an abundance of energy that can be felt inside, within, underneath, right? But there's no actual movement on the day that she's stationary direct. And then obviously as she gets the momentum, when she's completely direct, the wheels just start turning, things start moving. That's when you'll see, I guess, you'll not only see, but you'll feel more inclined to start to progress forward, or to start to step forward into the things that you have yourself reevaluated over the last 40 days, if indeed you have done that on a conscious level. For those that haven't done it on a conscious level, that there'll likely still be significant changes and shifts, but the connection just won't be made for some people. So those are the main things that I wanted to highlight today. In addition to that, this year, 2020, without, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is going to be remembered as one of the most significant times in our life, for sure, for so many different reasons, personally and collectively. It's really, without question, one of the most intensified years relative to astrological alignments. We have 6 eclipses going on this year. We usually have 4 or 5, so having 6 is not a typical phenomenon. We have Venus that's gone retrograde. Now she is direct, so there's going to be a progress forward relative to Venusian things. We have Mars going retrograde this year as well. Mars enters the sign of Aries in a couple of days' time, I think on the 29th of June. And Mars is going to be in the sign of Aries until January 2021. That's a really long time, a really, really long time for Mars to be in Aries. Now, that's going to speak to a whole other timeline of things going on, but it is also in conjunction to this whole Venus, because they both happen to be going retrograde in the same year, okay? So they are speaking to the dimensions of things that are going on, the incredible intensified shifts and changes that are going on in our own consciousness relative to how much awareness we have about that and how in tune we are with that, or if it's totally externally focused and orientated, then it will mostly be seen and experienced as your life experience out there, right? But what we always need to come back to is how does this resonate within our own self, with our own self-awareness, with our own frequency. So Mars going retrograde in Aries is not going to be an easy experience. And again, so that is adding another level and layer to 2020 being probably one of the most challenging years. Now, Mars in Aries, as we know, Mars rules Aries as it rules Scorpio, and as Pluto rules Scorpio as well. But Mars in Aries is such a dynamic, energized Mars. It's like a rocket through the sky. The speed of Mars in Aries is phenomenal. The energy is so raw, intense, and that the natural impulse of Mars in Aries is really intense in terms of its desire to act. So put Mars in Aries and take it back, as in taking it through a retrograde experience, that's going to be very, very challenging relative to the world events especially. So I'll come back and speak about that in more specific terms relative to Mars itself, but that's just something to be aware of as well. And also finally, just to kind of wrap things up, this Venus star point in Gemini, which, by the way, if you want to encapsulate or understand an even bigger picture to this, you could look at the entire Venus star points, the current ones relative to this Venus in Gemini star point, and just map them out in your birth chart, because they too could be in very significant places in your birth chart that could be hit off by certain transiting planets at the moment. So that's just a more detailed and bigger picture view. But even just looking at Venus retrograde in Gemini, because it is the Venus star point for the current time, it can be extremely powerful, even if it's not your own natal Venus star point, right? So my natal Venus star point is not Gemini, but yet this Gemini Venus star point has been so extremely significant for me in in my whole essence, in my whole being, relative to the things that I love and value very, very deeply, which includes astrology. And also, in esoteric astrology, Venus is the esoteric ruler of Gemini. So when we add that dimension into this Venus star point in Gemini, and in esoteric astrology, Venus is the esoteric ruler of Gemini. So because Gemini is a dual sign, right? It's the twins, okay? It's the brother, sister, the siblings. By the way, those are important themes that could come up or could have come up with this Gemini, Venus and Gemini retrograde cycle. Matters around siblings. I had that as part of one of the themes in my life of late as well. But from the exoteric level and the personality level, Gemini, as I have said before, frequently gets caught up in the left brain, left mind, linear perspective or projection of, it gets caught up of the whole right, wrong type of thing, judgment of that's right, that's wrong, that's good, that's bad. It's splitting things up. That's what Gemini always does, and especially when it's projected and filtered through the personality level. Hence the huge diverse of opinions relative to what's going on in the state of the world at the moment, and the very strong opinions that many people have, which hold a position of, and this is what Gemini does when it's projected through the personality. It's that whole thing of, my opinion is right, so therefore your opinion has to be wrong. We can't both be right. So if I'm right, that means you're wrong. Hence, that's what creates the split, the division, the projection, the blame, all that sort of stuff, which is more of the personality frequency of Gemini. But when we take it through the esoteric lens and Venus becomes the ruler of Gemini, then what happens is the infusion of Venus through the sign of Gemini from an esoteric lens is what establishes the harmony that Gemini split holds, right? So it's the love fusion of Venus coming through the sign of Gemini, which can bring about the balance and the harmony that we so desperately need on this earth plane. Because one of the reasons, just to put it very, very simply, that we are witnessing a lot of the things that we are witnessing at the moment, in my personal opinion, and it is my personal opinion, but it's not just based on my own personal opinion, it's based on research I have done study, reading, discussing these subjects with other people and so forth. So it's not just purely my personal opinion, but the imbalance that we have gotten to relative to how we live here on this earth plane, which connects to everything we do. It connects to our everyday life, our beliefs, our choices, our lifestyles, our treatment of each other, our treatment of the earth, our treatment of the animal kingdom. All of that has gotten to a level which it's so imbalanced that the only thing that could happen was for the scales to the light to sort of shine, as it were, to how deeply imbalanced we have become as a human race on the earth plane, because of the acceleration as well of technology, which the acceleration of technology has huge advantages. We all know that on a number of different streams and levels relative to information, communication, teaching, learning, data, all that sort of Gemini stuff. There's a lot of advantages to that, but the disadvantages from the personality level has been that it's taken us out of our heart center and filled our left brain with an overload of information and insatiable desire to want more and more and more, and to want it instantly as well. So that's taking us out of the heart center. So Venus, being the esoteric ruler of Gemini, is the reminder that we do live in a world of duality. That's Gemini, split black and white. We do live in a world of duality. There's no question of that. But Venus, being the ruler, is the reminder of bringing the diversity that exists, the nature of duality that exists. Venus is what can bring the harmonizing component into the diversity that exists, because it would be totally boring if we were all the same. So there needs to be this diversity, but the diversity from a personality level, unfortunately, is what creates division and conflict, right? So when we can infuse the love of Venus, that's when we can start to bring in the acceptance and the love towards having some sense of peace and balance and harmony on the earth plane relative to the diversity that exists. We're not saying we need to get rid of the diversity. We're saying we need to unify the diversity and accept it, accept the differences in all of us. If we did that from a place of our heart center, the perspective of diversity wouldn't have the edge that it does relative to how the personality perceives that, which is usually through judgment or through dividing. So Venus is the fusion through the heart, esoterically, through Gemini, the dual nature of Gemini, the dual nature of this reality, that where everything is split up into black, white, right, wrong, day, night. Duality is it's a reality. It's an experience of our reality here on the earth plane, at least. But the imbalance of that has become so severe. So we've reached a point where we need to get that balance in an appropriate level, so that matters can be addressed that have been ignored, not dealt with, all that sort of stuff. So even just from your own personal level, in terms of your own personal birth chart, when you're bringing in the esoteric component of Venus ruling this Gemini star point, you're accessing a much higher frequency of Venus. You're accessing the highest frequency of Gemini from an esoteric level as well. The thing is this, according to R.L. Goodman, the Venus Star Point is, which is, you can find this on her website, which is sophiawisdom.com, something like that. You'll find it if you just type in her name and Sophia Wisdom. You'll get her website, and on her website she's got a PDF that you can download, which is a PDF of tables where she's been so generous to outline all the Venus star points going back from 1900s sometime, and going as forward as 2050, I think, something like that. So you can find your Venus star point and map it out in your own chart, because the Venus star point is it's the deeper side. It's the you could say it's the soul side of Venus, the soul energy, the soul heart energy of Venus, as it is expressed and as it emanates through you. And it's also your innate talents and gifts that can be extracted, that can be understood, worked with. It's often the case that people see these talents and gifts in you, you don't really see them in yourself. So knowing where your Venus star point was before birth is very, very useful relative to activating Venus from the highest heart-centered, soul-centered level. So this Venus retrograde cycle that we've just been through, which is the Venus Gemini star point, is speaking to all of this. When we understand it's a Venus star point connecting to an entire pentagram, which draws a pentagram, which is a cycle that Venus does with the sun and the earth every 8 years, although she creates 2 pentagrams through one cycle of 8 years, because she has to go through being the morning star and the evening star. That's why she creates 2 pentagrams, in my understanding. So yeah, check that out and see for yourself, because the Venus star point, whatever that is for you, it's not, it doesn't hold the same interpretation, or maybe not interpretation is not the right word, because the interpretation can be similar in certain ways, because Venus in any sign, whether it's a Venus star point or whether it's Venus in your chart, those characteristics are still going to be in play. But the point is to understand that Venus, your natal Venus in your birth chart, speaks more to the orientation you have to all things Venus, but how you go about it from an external sort of level, how you go about attracting what you want, how you go about relationships, what do you invest yourself in from the external sort of level, even though Venus has an internal and external level as well from an evolutionary perspective, right? But the Venus star point has this whole other frequency, this whole other level to what it means in your own life and in your own birth chart. It's worth exploring. I've been exploring mine and some clients and some people in my personal life now for the last few weeks, and I've found extraordinary richness in terms of what it means, in people's lives, just how powerful it is, because it's very, very different to your natal Venus. You might have them in the same sign, by the way. You might have Venus and Scorpio, and you might have a Venus Scorpio star point. That might happen. Still, the natal Venus and the Venus star point are operating in different ways. The Venus star point, as I said, that one of the best sort of descriptions I think that I've heard so far, it's the heart of the soul of Venus. It's so beautiful. So those are some of my considerations. And as I said, you know, the esoteric ruler being um, Venus of Gemini holds tremendous significance at this point in time with this Venus star point, because just look at the world around us, look at what's happening, look at the shift and the changes that are going on. You can see what's going on in so many different ways. It just depends on what lens you are looking through. But ultimately, I think the crucial element here is that if we get stuck or lost in the Gemini splitting, then we're just we're just identifying with um, a certain stream of thoughts and opinions. But is that connected to our heart? And this is what the esoteric ruler, Venus to Gemini, is reminding us of. It's got to come back to the heart center. And just one other final thing, which is really, really interesting. There are 7 rays in esoteric astrology, and ray number 5 is ruled by Venus. And ray number 5 is concrete science and knowledge. And it's the vehicle of expression for the ideas in the mind of God, which is so beautiful to me. Just that phrase is so beautiful, because relative to this Venus in Gemini being retrograde at the moment, it's just another layer showing us that whilst Gemini correlates to the left brain and our own personal opinions, once we infuse, as I said before, the Venus frequency through the Gemini, we're tuning into the mind of God, because we are activating the heart center. It doesn't reside or stay at that level of just our own personal opinion. We've opened up and we've accessed the divine mind to come through our left brain and our right brain too, because Gemini sits opposite Sagittarius, so we can't really divide those in the sense where they're not connected. They are totally connected, that they are a polarized unit. So all that matters. But ray number 5, tuning into the ideas of the mind of God and bringing them through. Now, I mean, that's quite a, you could say that's quite a esoteric or philosophical expression, but what does that mean? Well, for me, what that would mean is to step back and get out of my own small mind and allow the frequency of God's ideas to come through me, so that I can have a greater understanding, so I can have a greater ability to see through my third eye, to connect to the heart center. So have a think about that for your own self, and see how you feel. Let me know. Feel free to add some comments below. Just one final thing, which is really, really important. So with this current retrograde cycle we've just been through, even though she's now direct, it's still really good for you if you're really into Venus and your chart and astrology and retrograde cycles and wanting to understand yourself, your chart, your life more. Well, it's always worth just going back and looking at things, right? Not just anticipating what's to come, but by going back and looking at timelines, this is how you learn the symbolism of astrology as well. It's so fundamental, actually, to understanding the symbolism of astrology, because astrology is a language, like I've said before. So look at the degrees in your birth chart from 5 to 21 of Gemini. That window of 5 degrees to 21, all those degrees that sit in between 5 to 21 can be highly significant for you. It could just be one of those degrees, or it could be a couple, just depends what you have going on there, right? That's one thing to really note, because this retrograde cycle has spent she has spent her time in those degrees of Gemini, and that retrograde cycle for 40 days has it's it's churned up um, a lot of things for you in your life. So it's just very interesting to go back and see what might have been connecting to any of those degrees. Okay. In addition to that, the other thing to note is that on June 3rd, which is when the Sun and Venus were conjunct and Venus was closest to the Earth, which is called the Cazimi conjunction, which is when the Venus star point occurred, June the 3rd. That was one of the important days or dates, right? That was the creation of the star point, as it were. So that 13, number 13, is very, very significant. So you would look at to see, well, do you have any Gemini planets at 13, 14, 12 degrees around there? You would look at all the mutable signs in your chart. So what are the mutable signs? It's Gemini, um, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. They are the four mutable signs. So look at what you have at 13 degrees in any of those signs, because this star point would have activated those points in your chart. Then you can go further and you can have a look at what do you have at 13 degrees period. Doesn't matter what sign it is, because essentially 13, this star point at 13 degrees will activate all the 13 degrees in the chart. It's just a different aspect, different harmonics basically, and different harmonics have different meanings, but they're all important to some extent. It's just about understanding what they mean. So that's just something else to consider as well. Um, and just keep in mind that this is the birth of a brand new 8-year cycle. So I think, I mean, in my experience, the more clear, we are with our intentions and what we're investing ourselves into, deciding with true clarity from your heart has a different, seems to have a different manifestation as that opens up. It's like a flower. It's like you plant a little seed and this flower, which is Venus, just opens up, right? When you bring really clear intention and focus into that, something very powerful occurs because you are totally tuning into that Venus frequency from the heart soul level. So have a think about those points and see how you go. You can always contact me if you want a personal reading relative to this or anything else. And okay, I'll leave it there for today. I have to get back to my work. I only have just started working again today, actually, so now I have to get back to some work. There is a lunar eclipse coming up. When is it? It's on the... Just want to share my screen before I go. So, that doesn't allow me to... Anyway, it's on the 5th of July, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's about the 5th of July, and it's a lunar eclipse in Capricorn. Of course, because we had the solar eclipse 2 weeks prior to that, right? So naturally, 2 weeks after that, we're going to have a full moon. It just happens to be a lunar eclipse. So that's going to be very important as well. And I will try to come back and speak about that. I'll see how I go. Just wanted to Um, so this is just the chart for when Venus was stationary direct, right? Which was the 25th of June. So you can see that little S there next to Venus. That's showing us that she's stationary, meaning she's stopped, ready to change direction, right? So she was retrograde for 40 days, and in that moment, she stopped to change her direction. That's a very potent zone of energy on that particular day. Now, obviously, for those of you in the northern hemisphere, the time would be different to this, because this is for Melbourne, Australia, right? So just adjust that according to your location. But if you haven't been consciously sort of monitoring this or following it, and if you are interested in understanding it more relative to what I've said today, just have a look at where Venus has been in your chart, and did anything happen, around the 25th, 26th, which 26 will be today for you guys, because it's already the 27th for me. So maybe, yeah, just let it be what it's going to be. But I'd be interested to hear your comments if anything significant has appeared relative to this Venus going direct for you, and how that links into what's been happening over the last 40 days, as it were. So yeah, please share your stories. I'd love to hear them, and that way other people can kind of learn from hearing. We all learn from hearing each other's experiences and stories as well. And yeah, Mercury went retrograde just recently. That was very, very interesting. It's already created some technological issues for me yesterday, because I was supposed to do this video yesterday, and I just didn't get around to it. But it worked out much better, because yeah, it just did. But anyway, Mercury in Pisces in Cancer is pretty amazing, actually, relative to psychic material from the past as well. Retrieving material relative to past lives and family and things like that. This can be very, very powerful, especially while Mercury is retrograde in the sign of Cancer. Cancer is actually one of the signs that is definitely associated to having just an incredible imagination, vivid imagination. It's just amazing artists actually have very strong Cancer in their chart, right? It's just an incredible sign for imagination, visual imagery, and what it can create just from tuning into the cosmos and various realms. It's amazing. So it's Mercury in Cancer retrograde at the moment is taking us through this journey, this internal, deep, deep, deep soul journey, where we can retrieve perhaps material that might just be very relevant to where we are at our life journey at the moment from an evolutionary level. It can be an opportunity to clear some past material. There's so many things you could do with Mercury in Cancer retrograde, just about working with that energy. Okay, so I will leave it there for today, and I'll see you guys very soon. Sending you all much love and blessings. I hope you're all doing well, and yeah, look forward to reading your comments and questions. Okay, much love. Thanks. Bye.